So when we talk about family, and that's what we're going to talk about today, we're going to start talking about family systems today. I don't know if you've ever heard that, someone saying, oh, why can't you just be a normal family? Why can't we just be a normal family? Have you ever heard anyone say that? Why can't you just be normal, right? Well, the truth is there is no normal family. Every family is different. And in fact, next week we're going to talk about 7 different types of family systems. So there's no normal family, but what we're looking for are healthy families. That's, I think, the key word. That's where we should be pursuing is healthy families. And on your study guide, we've listed 12 characteristics of what a healthy family looks like. So this would be the goal. And you would have to assess your own family and see where you are on that scale, see where you are on that continuum, a goal that you can move towards. So number 1, this is on the study guide. Number 1 on the study guide. Characteristic number 1 of a healthy family is that problems are handled as a family. So that should go in the blank there of question number 1. Problems are handled as a family, not just as individuals. There's a sense in healthy families that we're all in this together. We are here for each other. We're here for each other. Whatever problem arises, your problem is my problem, and we're going to figure this out together, and we're going to move forward together. At the same time, there's a healthy insistence that individuals take responsibility for their own lives. Did you catch that, right? So we're here to help you, but we also want to see you have a little bit of skin in the game as well, right? We want to see you put a little bit of effort, We're going to help you, but, and it was your mistake, but we want to see a little bit, like I said, a little bit of skin in the game. We want to see you take responsibility for your own lives. In healthy families, number 2, there is direct communication. We deal straightforwardly with one another, and we deal directly with one another, rather than through third parties or go-betweens. And this one here is a challenging one, and even as I'm thinking about these family systems, is my microphone, is it breaking? Is it breaking up? I'll just switch to this one then. Okay. All right. And I can't help, when we think about family systems, I can't help but see correlations with churches and the way churches function and church systems. And so we deal directly with one another. One of my biggest challenges is, I struggle with direct communication because I'm always afraid that if I'm direct with someone and straightforward with someone, I'm going to offend them, I'm going to hurt their feelings, and then they're going to stop coming to church. And it happens. It happens. I want to say all the time. And so my fear with communicating directly is I need to say this, but, oh man, I'm afraid they're going to get offended, right? That also happens in families, doesn't it? We want to say this, but they're going to get upset with us, so we hold back. In healthy families, there can be direct communication. There can be straightforward communication. People don't get offended. Number 3, there are clear expectations. This actually kind of goes back to number 1. We're here to help you, but this is what I expect. As we're helping you, I expect to see this, and that. There are clear expectations. Number 4, there is mutual learning. And again, I think related to communication is there's an ability to receive feedback. Whether that feedback is positive or the feedback is negative, I am available, willing to receive it. Pastor, your sermon was terrible. It was too long. I'm okay. I'm able to receive it. Pastor, your sermon's boring. I'm able to receive it. I don't get offended. I try to figure out how can I make my sermons more exciting, okay, or shorter. These kinds of things. Right, you're able to speak directly, and, we take the feedback and we welcome it and we learn together, which will bring us to another point here. Healthy families, characteristics of healthy families. Number 5. Thoughts and feelings of others are respected. That's important here, respect. Thoughts and feelings of others are respected. Number 6, and differences are encouraged and accepted. So again, thinking about in the family system, although I'm going to be making applications to churches because, it's just, they're there for the taking, but in a family system, we encourage differences, we accept differences. In fact, we encourage our children to think for themselves. I don't want my children to be carbon copies of myself. They're already going to be like me, whether they like it or not, but I want them to be able to think for themselves, process things for themselves. And so what we have in a healthy family is we have a basic set of shared values. And I can't, I think about the church as well, but in a family, we have a basic set of shared values. But then beyond that set of shared values, there's diversity of expression. There's diversity of opinions. There's diversity of perspectives and attitudes and emotions and practices. And so I can, I'm going to go here. I can be a Republican and be married to a Democrat. And we're not going to get divorced, and we can have conversations about it, and we can still love each other even though we have differences among us. And hopefully the same thing can happen at church, right? We have our core set of values. Jesus, he saved us, right? He's coming soon. We believe that he's coming soon. We believe that the end, that we're trending towards the end of the world. He's coming soon. We believe that because we love Jesus, he's asking us to come to church on Sabbath, right? On the seventh-day Sabbath, to worship him, right? We have these core set of values that keep us together, but then beyond the core set of values, there's diversity of opinion, of expression, and it's okay, and we're not going to label one another liberal or conservative or godly and ungodly or worldly or, no, we love one another. We're in this together. Healthy families, healthy churches. Differences are encouraged and accepted. Number 7, there are clear boundaries, and we're going to talk about that when we get to the family assessment of what exactly that looks like, clear boundaries. Number 8, characteristics of healthy families. Number 8, there is solid cross-generational connections. I think this is really important. In a healthy family, there is solid cross-generational connections. The young do not isolate themselves from the old, and the old don't cut themselves off from the children and the young adults. In my family, we didn't have cross-generational connections. I remember in my family, the adults were with the adults, and the kids were with the kids, and the adults never hung out with the kids, never played with the kids. And in fact, I found a meme that kind of expresses my feeling of how I viewed the adults when I was a kid. I don't know if you can relate to this or not, but here it is. Here's a meme. This is what I thought of as adults, my parents, my grandparents, when I was a little kid. How much I thought my parents knew, and my grandparents for that reason. I thought they were old fuddy-duddies. They didn't know anything. They weren't with it and whatever else. Now that I'm older, I realize how much they really knew, right? But I didn't grow up that way. I didn't grow up with solid cross-generational connections. And in fact, I can share my story. The very first time I actually, we're my senior members. I don't even have to raise your hand, but we're my senior members. The first time that I actually had any kind of meaningful interaction with my senior members or with those who are living in their golden years. Is that a better way to say it? Those who are living in their golden years. The first interaction I had was when I became pastor of the Inverness Church, just an hour north of here, in 2009. And I was like 28 or 29 years old. That was the first time, and everybody in there was in their 80s. That was the first time that I had any kind of significant interaction with people who were older. People who had great-grandchildren that were older than me at that time. I was 28, 29. They had great-grandchildren that were older than me. And I'm here, their pastor, ready to change the world, But I love that experience there. I came to appreciate my senior members so much. I love them so much. The wealth and the wisdom and the knowledge and the experience that our senior members have is just incredible. And so I love you very much. But I was deprived of that for the first 28 years of my life for whatever reason. But healthy families, there is solid cross-generational connections. People are connected with their parents. They recognize and appreciate the value and benefits derived from the various generations, such as learning, growth, feedback, and enjoyment. Number 9. Characteristics of a healthy family. Family members value it as a good place to live. Now, this is also something that I had growing up, is that I always thought other families were better than my own family. Anybody else think that, or was I the only one? I always well, look at that family, they let them do this and let them do that. I wish I was part of that family, It's only later in life that anyways. Members value the home as a good place. In other words, it's a place you want to be at. It's a place you want to stay at. Hopefully not too long, but you'll hopefully eventually leave, make your own. But it is a place that you have fond memories of, that you like to return to. Question number 10. Characteristics of a healthy family. The home atmosphere maintains a positive emotional climate. This is really important. There's not pessimism all the time. Everything's dreary and everything's bad. They're actually in a healthy home. There's a positive emotional climate. And even though there's a positive emotional climate, number 11, in healthy families, people are allowed to experience their own emptiness. This one's kind of a strange one, but what does this mean? It means that life is filled with ups and downs. And it's in the down times when people feel most unaccepted. In the down times, they feel most unaccepted. In healthy families, people are free to express the downside of life without being judged or trying to fix them or repress their feelings. So it's that balance of, yes, we keep the positivity of number 10, but we also recognize that life also has its ups and downs, and it's okay, and we're not going to judge you, and we're here for you, and it's okay. In fact, I think Ecclesiastes says that, doesn't it? There's a time for laughing and for dancing and for joy. There's also a time for mourning, and for sorrow and for loss, And so it's maintaining that balance. And which is number 12. Healthy families are balanced, and we'll talk about this one here a little bit more, and they're able to adapt to change. There is a resiliency in healthy families. All right, so I can't help but make comparisons, like I said, to the church. So, all right, what we're going to do now is we're going to move to the part of the study guide that says family continuums. And we're going to talk about the adaptability scale, and we're also going to talk about the attachment scale. And that is where this family assessment comes in. And again, for those of you who are online, I believe I put a link on the description in the YouTube channel for this family assessment. It is 2 pages. It's double-sided. And so you don't fill it out now, but when you go back home, you can fill it out. And I think it'll make a lot more sense after you hear what I have to say about what the scale evaluates, adaptability and attachment. So these scales here, adaptability and attachment, these scales, they gauge how well your family adapts or adjusts to change. And on either end of these scales, we'll have 2 extremes. This one is, I believe it's the adaptability. Yeah, this is the adaptability scale. So on the adaptability scale, and you'll also see it here on your handout. It's the first one, adaptability. It says adaptable in the middle, and it has the scale here, right? So on either end of the adaptability scale, you'll see 2 extremes. You will see rigid families, and you'll see chaotic families. And what we want to be adaptable families. But let me talk here about these two opposite extremes, rigid and chaotic families. So both of these families, though they're on the opposite ends of the spectrum of adaptability, these families actually have a few things in common. Number 1, both rigid families and chaotic families, and you may already be thinking what kind of family you came from. Was it rigid or chaotic or somewhere in between? It's a scale, it's a continuum. But both of these families are poorly equipped for problem solving. In rigid families, well, they will tend to make decisions quickly, arbitrarily, and they will impose them on other members of the family with little forethought or planning. In chaotic families, there is so much chaos that decisions are rarely made. There's a lot of talk in chaotic families, but not a lot of decisions. And if decisions are made after all the talking, then there's no follow-up or implementation, and hence the problem is still unresolved. Number 2, both families, rigid and chaotic, they have a hard time dealing with emotions. Rigid families tend not to express emotions, and if emotions are expressed, they're ignored. Again, I'm sorry, I can't help make connections with church. Have you ever seen rigid churches where the expression of emotion is just not acceptable? Have you ever seen that? Okay, sorry about that. We're going there. And if someone does show a little bit of emotion, we just kind of ignore it, or happy Sabbath, see you later. In chaotic families, there's a lot of emotional expression. But in all the chaos, the emotions get lost, they get ignored in the shuffle. Both families, rigid and chaotic, they are equally as fragile, and they are equally ready to crack, ready to break, ready to fragment when disruptors or stressors come along, which they will. People will lose jobs. That will be a stressor on the family. There will be illness, a stressor on the family. There will be loss. There will be death. Even there will be birth. That's a stressor on the family. There will be relocation. There's all kinds of stressors that will impact your family. How well can your family adapt to those changes and adjust to those changes? And so at this point, we're going to get into the sensitive material. So if you didn't leave with Dr. McCumbee, and if you want to leave at this point, or if you want your kid to leave at this point, it's fine. We'll give you a moment to do that. Rigid families, they tend to be authoritarian. Leadership is clearly defined, and everyone knows who the boss is, and everyone knows what the rules are. And so we're going to talk about a rigid family right now. Lydia had been molested by her stepfather from the time she was 12 until she left home at the age of 16. Her mother knew what was happening, but did nothing about it. She would simply wait in another room until it was over. Sometimes she even watched it occur. As an adult, Lydia began seeing a therapist, and in the course of time, her therapist arranged for her mother and her stepfather to join her in a joint counseling session. Lydia had written down what she wanted to say to them. She had even practiced with other patients at the hospital how she would say it. Yes, the trauma was such that Lydia had to be admitted into the psych ward. There would be no hysterical name-calling or exaggerated accusations, just a straightforward recitation of what had happened and how it had made her feel. Lydia and her therapist, they felt that taking this step was important if Lydia was to let go of her bitterness and get free of her past. Lydia's parents, they sat silently through her presentation, and when she finished, they stoically denied everything. Both of them. They were quite calm, matter-of-fact about it. The only emotion they showed was irritation that Lydia had accused them of such terrible things in front of a stranger. In some ways, Lydia had run into a brick wall. She was disappointed at her parents' denial. See, Lydia came from a rigid family. Her stepfather was the undisputed leader in the family. His decisions were final, even when they were immoral and destructive. His position in the family was unassailable, and Lydia's mother went along with everything because in the context of her family system, she could do nothing else. Let's talk about Tom here. Though not nearly as rigid or dysfunctional as Lydia's family, Tom was indeed the benevolent dictator. Any smiles on that one? He was benevolent, though. He was utterly rational in the way that he led his family. There was a rule and there was a policy in place for every situation that might arise. Again, I'm thinking of some churches here. If his children wanted something, they had to present reasons that Tom would find persuasive. His children simply wanting something was not good enough. Tom's wife, Margaret, conformed to his idea of what a wife and a mother should be. Margaret wanted to work outside the home, but that didn't suit Tom. He felt that if Margaret started working, she would become unacceptably independent. Controlling the family environment was a major priority for Tom. And as you look into his past, you gradually discover that Tom had come from a similar home where his father's decisions were always final. Tom's wife, Margaret, she had come from a similar background in which dad was the unquestioned leader and mom was the compliant follower. The irony is that that's what Margaret was looking for in a man, because it gave her a sense of security, knowing what she could expect in the marriage relationship. So there's a scale to this, all right? We've looked at rigid families. We're going to look at chaotic families. In a chaotic family, unlike in a rigid family, there's no leadership. Sorry, I can't help but think about churches that have no leadership. Sorry about that. Anyways, each individual is a law unto himself. Have you ever been in churches where every department does whatever they want to do? It doesn't matter who. Anyways, all right, sorry. But we're talking about families here. No one takes charge in a consistent way. What leadership there is in a chaotic family is exercised sporadically, first by one member of the family, then by another member of the family. Children in chaotic families seem to be the ones who are in charge most often. Rules are unwritten, unspoken. They change without warning at the whim of whoever happens to be in the saddle at the moment. The raising and disciplining of children is very erratic. Sometimes consequences are applied, sometimes they're not. Sometimes parents mean what they say. Other times they seem to forget what they've told the children as soon as the words leave their mouths. The children are often quite vocal about their anger and disrespect, but it has little or no effect. It just all becomes part of the chaos. Chaotic families. Sensitive story number 2. Mary. Mary's depression, it was so severe, and it was so long-standing that it was hard for her to dig through the layers of emotional calluses that she had built up. And it was difficult for her to come to grips with her family background, a background that was a nightmare. Mary's father was an alcoholic. Her mother was physically abusive. Her mother had once beaten Mary with a metal towel rack. Both parents were verbally abusive. When her parents would go out and leave her, they would leave the house and they would leave her and her older brother home alone, Mary would feel relief that they weren't there. But even soon, that led to other problems. When Mary was 8, her older brother began to molest her. After the first time it happened, and when Mary's mom came back home, Mary sobbed as she told her mom what had happened, and Mary's mom then asked her brother about it, and he, of course, he denied doing anything wrong. And so Mary's mother called her a liar and sent her to her room. Both Mary and her brother, they learned a lesson that day. That is, sexual abuse could continue, and that Mary would endure in silence. The combination of an alcoholic father, an unstable mother, plus the fact that both parents were frequently absent, meant that Mary's older brother was often the one in charge. He was a law unto himself. He did what he wanted, and neither Mary nor any of the other siblings could complain to their parents. And even if they did complain, it didn't matter. The parents either didn't care what the older brother did or simply weren't interested in stopping him. Chaotic family. Now remember, there's a range, there's a continuum in this family scale, in this family dynamic. Stan described his family as having endless conversations and decisions, and actions never came to fruition. Sorry, I can't stop thinking about churches and church boards who love to have conversations, and then when it's time to do something, nothing ever gets done. Life, this is what Stan says, life would just happen. Circumstances would conspire to force his family's hand to do something. They were reactive rather than proactive. And Stan admits that he unwittingly carried this same style into his home. And I think this is what happens, is that we do this without even thinking. We start, our family becomes like this without us even being aware that it's become like this. He admits that he unwittingly carried the same chaotic style into his home, into his family, and he didn't realize it until one day. His teenage daughter, anybody teenage daughters here? His teenage daughter threw up her hands and exclaimed, I'm not going to try to repeat it, but if you can hear it in your own stuff. His teenage daughter, frustrated with him, threw up her hands and finally said, "Dad, I just want a yes or a no, not an endless discussion. Ugh." Anybody relate? It was at that moment that Stan realized, oh, wait a minute. I am my mom and dad. I am my parents. So what we want here, if you look on the scale, what we want, you got the rigid family, you got the chaotic family. What we want to go for is to be an adaptable family. And again, the assessment will help you with this to try to identify where you're at and where you need to go with this. An adaptable family has clear but flexible leadership. Did you catch that? Healthy but adjustable discipline. In an adaptable family, everyone knows who's in charge, but they also know that the leader is someone who can be talked to and reasoned with. They know the rules, they know the consequences for breaking the rules, but they also know that the rules are fair and they're sensible and that exceptions can be made when the situation warrants. Are you following me, Newport Richie? Problems are discussed, but those discussions, they lead to decisions. And those decisions then reflect the input of various family members in the family, both the children and the adults. It's not top-heavy. It's not just dad says this is what we're going to do and we're all going to do it. Roles are clear. Parents are parents. Children are children. But communication is plentiful between them. People know what's expected of them. But they also know how to negotiate those expectations when legitimate needs to do so arise. Okay? All right, let's talk about now the attachment scale. The attachment scale is a gauge used to refer to how the family is bonded with one another. And similar to the adaptable scale or the adaptability scale, there are also two extremes, and you'll see it there on your handout. The two extremes are the enmeshed families and the disengaged families. Enmeshed families are characterized by an extreme sense of closeness, so much so that most any expression of independence or separation is seen as disloyalty to the family. This kind of false loyalty is a very high value in an enmeshed family. Do you want to hear about an enmeshed family, what that looks like? Marty. Marty feels a great deal of hostility toward her mother. But then she's overwhelmed with guilt at her disloyalty. I mean, how can I feel this way about my mother? It's wrong. Well, let me tell you why Marty feels hostility toward her mom. Marty had very few friends growing up. And one of these days we'll talk about the smother, but we'll talk about that some other time. Her mother dominated her use of time and energy. Marty, she felt obligated to check everything she did with her mom, to run all her plans and ideas past her for approval before proceeding. When Marty turned 18, she wanted to go off to college, but Marty's mom told her that she couldn't go. The family needed her there, and so Marty canceled her plans, stayed home, got a part-time job, which helped alleviate some of the family's financial stresses. Are there parents that hold their children back? Are there parents that hold their children back? A few years later, she was 18. A few years afterwards, Marty's 22. Marty once again applied and was accepted to go to a university several hundred miles from home. She was even offered a scholarship to help eliminate any financial obstacles. But that same year, her younger brother graduated from high school, and there was no way that the family could afford to send two children through college. Marty greatly resented the state of affairs. She knew it was a way for her mother to keep her under her thumb. But then the thought of breaking free from her mother terrified Marty. So, Marty stayed home, continued working, helping to put her younger brother through school. Marty's now 36. She never went to college, even though she did help pay for her younger brother and then her younger sister's education. Marty still lives at home with her parents. Marty knows that she missed out on a lot, and she confesses to the bitterness and the resentment, but then she just couldn't leave. Her family needed her so much. And even though her friends, they recognized what was happening, they recognized the family dynamic that was taking place, and even though her friends, they spent a great deal of energy trying to get her to see that you're wasting your life, Marty. You're letting life pass you by. Marty, one of these days you're going to regret it when your parents are gone, and so on. It was all to no avail. And it's not that Marty didn't recognize the truth of what her friends were saying. Her response was simply, yes, but my family needs me. And so, Newport Richie, where does one person's business, one person's identity, where does one person's life end and another's begin? Within the enmeshed family, boundaries, there's that word, boundaries are virtually non-existent. And yet, ironically enough, enmeshed families have a very strong boundary for anyone who is outside of the family. This is kind of ironic. You know, family business is family business, never be discussed with outsiders. So in a enmeshed family, strong boundaries for everyone outside, no boundaries for people in. So I mean, if you're part of the in group, I'm making an application to church now. If you're part of the in group, what do they call in groups in churches? Cliques, right? Cliques, all right? If you're part of that in group in the church, it's great, it's fantastic, but then nobody can get in. Hopefully, we don't have, and if you are a clique, be an open clique where you invite everybody to be part of it, right? I don't want to say go form your own clique, or form your own clique, no, but that's the irony, right? Inside, no boundaries. Outside, very strong boundaries. And so George had built, that's the dad, by the way, George is the dad. George had built a successful bakery in his town, if you want to know what an enmeshed family looks like. His 3 grown sons, they were all active in the business. They had established a virtual monopoly on the baking business in that area. They had also established a monopoly on each other's lives. So here's Tim, the oldest son. Tim wanted to get married. He's almost 30 years old, and by the age of 30, he had canceled not 1, not 2. He had already canceled 3 previous engagements. Why? Because his family didn't think that the girl would fit in to their family. Finally, he found a girl that everyone approved of. Right? You want to know about this? She was quiet and she was docile. In fact, she had come from a family in which people were aloof and uncaring. And this is kind of where we talked about opposites attract, right? You come from a disengaged family, and then you see an enmeshed family, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's the family I always wanted, and then you get in there only to realize, wait a minute, this is a little too enmeshed here. Or you come from an enmeshed family, and then you're attracted to someone that comes from a disengaged family because you're like, oh, there's finally peace. No one's in anybody's business. And I'm, only to realize then that, anyways, we'll talk about that here a little bit later. But anyways, in time, though, and so Tim's wife would say, I finally found a real family, and his parents, they just smiled, and everyone was happy and content. In time, Tim's 2 younger brothers, they also married, and as with Tim, guess where their wives came from? highly detached, uninvolved families. Each was quickly absorbed into their clan and into the bakery business. George's family here is an example of a moderately enmeshed family, not quite suffocating enough to cause the kinds of discomfort that Marty experienced, but enough to blur the individual members into what one family researcher calls, and this is a big word here, an undifferentiated ego mass. Disengaged families. All right, so we talked about enmeshed families, disengaged families, though. Again, I'm thinking about churches here. Closeness nor loyalty are particularly prized by disengaged families. Disengaged families, they value independence. They value relationships outside the family. In fact, they value relationships outside the family more than they value their relationships in the family. Family members often know less about one another's plans and activities than they know about most of their friends and neighbors' plans. In fact, let me even say it another way. Family members know more about, friends and neighbors know more about your family's plans than you yourself know about your own family's plans. Oh, did you see your brother was in town? Oh, no, he didn't call me. I had no idea he was in town. Or you go on social media and you see all the different places where your family members are visiting and all the places they're seeing, and it's been 10 years and they still haven't come to visit you. Don't ask me how I know. Anyways, here goes. Disengaged families, or what about disengaged churches, where no one's engaging with one another? All right, anyways, so let's talk about Larry here. All right, now, disengaged families. Larry spent, Larry spent the first 5 years of his life waiting, and these stories, I think, these are, you look at them now, he's an adult, and he's balding, and he's grown, middle-aged, whatever, and you look at all these pictures and say, well, they're adults, and I know trauma can happen as adults, but the majority of this is happening to them when they're just kids. I think that's the heartbreaking thing, and I think for us Newport Richie families, parents, it's so important for us to create a home, a space, an environment that is safe for our children. And not just in our homes, but even here at church. Children are just the most important heritage that God has given to us. It's so important. Here is Larry, but when Larry was 5 years old, he spent the first 5 years of his life waiting. Usually he was sitting in the back seat of a car, and he was waiting for his parents to emerge thoroughly drunk from some bar. He became accustomed to being left behind, and one day he stood on his aunt's front porch, and he watched his parents drive away and leave him yet again, except that this time was different. Because this time, they never came back for him. And the one question that haunted Larry into adulthood was, where did his parents go? Why did they leave him? Where were they now? No one in Larry's family knows, a disengaged family. No one in Larry's family knew the answer to those questions. And so Larry then spent much of his childhood wondering why his parents had abandoned him. And the only reason he could come up with is that it was his fault, that he was the problem. And so he vented his anger in frequent fights at school, in the neighborhood. As soon as he was old enough to leave home, he did so. He joined the army. After being discharged, he drifted for several years, working an array of odd jobs, never staying in one place for long. Larry was your classic loner. No one, not even his wife and children, knew what he was like on the inside. And not surprisingly, Larry grew lonely and depressed to the point where he began to talk about suicide. Disengaged family. Susan, and this will be the last illustration here. Susan illustrates a less severe form of disengagement. Her parents had always given her a lot of latitude growing up, which at the time she valued and enjoyed. Come on, teenagers, when you're a teenager and if your parent would have just let you do whatever you wanted, how many of you would have loved that, right? Would have loved that, right? She loved it growing up. But then when she became a mother herself, she found it hard to respond to her own children's desire for greater freedom and autonomy. She experienced that natural motherly concern for their safety and welfare. She didn't want to risk the consequences of too much independence too soon. And it was this experience that made her reflect back on her own family and ask, wait a minute, why did my parents give me so much freedom? Why didn't they care enough about me to show more concern for my safety and my welfare? And so what we want, again, on the study guide here, we have the adaptable scale, the continuum, it's a continuum, and then we have the attachment scale, it's a continuum as well. What we want to do is if you're in a meshed family, if you're a disengaged family, what we want to do is we want to move towards the center, which is to become an attached family. What is an attached family? While the enmeshed family feels suffocating and the disengaged family leaves the individual feeling isolated, the attached family, it strikes a healthy balance. There's a sense of individuality in the attached family without the loss of connectedness. Attached families, they enjoy being together, but they're also able to be apart, and it's okay. And when they are away from each other, they don't feel guilty or disloyal, and the family doesn't pressure them in any way. They're able to have outside experiences. In the attached family, there's mutual respect that allows freedom of activity without any hidden agendas that trigger guilt. All right, so that's it. So Newport Richie, do the assessment. Start your Genogram, download that, genopro.com, and then as you follow the instructions there on the study guide about how to do the Genogram, what things to look for, what patterns to look for, try to see if you can identify where your family lands. Do the assessment. The assessment will help you with that, where you land on the attachment scale and the adaptability scale, and then we'll see you next week.